The truth is no longer a secret. It's a weapon. And now everyone wants to silence the ones holding it. Mason escaped the grave they dug for him. Julian returned from the shadows. And Samantha? She's not just fighting beside them. She's leading the war they never expected to win. It started with silence.
No headlines. No statements.
Not even a denial from Elaine's team. For the first time since the exposé dropped, the world didn't roar, it waited. Julian called it the storm's inhale. Samantha called it strategy. Mason, though? He called it war. At 7:13 a.m., a single article leaked online, buried deep on a foreign site. No author name, just a title. Targets acquired. The ones who broke Harrow. The article listed 3 names: Mason Blaine, Julian Blaine, Samantha Rowe, and below it, grainy surveillance images of them leaving the plaza the night before. "We're on a list now," Julian said, pacing their temporary safe house. "And not the kind that comes with awards." Samantha leaned over the table, scanning the names of shell companies tied to Harrow. "They're not just protecting Elaine," she said. "They're protecting clients, politicians, CEOs, people who pay to disappear their mistakes." Mason opened a new folder, one Julian had hesitated to touch. Inside were blackmail files Harrow had stored for years. Photos, bank records, audio clips. The kind of leverage that didn't just destroy reputations, it toppled dynasties. And Mason now held it all. He looked up at Samantha and said, "They came for me because I knew too little. Now they'll come harder, because I know too much." Mason walked through the hallway without hesitation now, no cane, no trembling steps. Just quiet focus. Samantha noticed it, the difference in his posture. The therapy had worked. The fog was gone from his eyes, and strength was slowly returning to his voice. "Your gait's almost normal," she said under her breath as they loaded a second drive into the encrypted laptop. He gave a faint smile. "Turns out when no one's poisoning you slowly, you bounce back." But recovery didn't mean safety. At 9:42 a.m. the first incident happened. A fire drill at the media office that had agreed to run their full story. 15 minutes later, the server went down. Coincidence? Samantha asked. Julian checked the backup site.
No.
That's a warning shot. Samantha scrolled through Harrow's client database. Over 70 names. 3 had already issued public statements denying ever knowing the facility existed. But one, an energy tycoon, had simply disappeared.
No social media. No flights.
No public appearance since Mason's story dropped. "They're scrubbing everything," she said. "Even their own." Mason looked out the window at the city below. "That means they're scared. And if they're scared, it means we still have a chance." He turned to Julian. "We need to release the final file." Julian raised an eyebrow. "The black box." Mason nodded. "The one Dad built to end this if it ever went too far." The black box wasn't a literal box. It was a file. A compressed digital vault created by Mason's father before his death. According to Julian, it held damning evidence. Ledgers, audio recordings, even video clips that documented the inner workings of Harrow, and how it catered to the world's most powerful. Mason had only recently decrypted it using a cipher buried in Julian's journal. They'd kept it secret, even from their allies. Now they were ready to weaponize it. They loaded the file into 3 secure servers with delayed release triggers, each set to activate if any of their accounts went dark. "Insurance," Julian said. "If they take us out, we still win." But Mason hesitated before hitting activate. "Once this goes out, there's no walking it back. This doesn't just expose Harrow. It'll drag governments, corporations, and families into the fire." Samantha stepped beside him. "Then it's time. No one else should be buried so someone else can shine." He pressed the key. Files uploaded. Trigger systems armed. The truth no longer belonged to them, it belonged to the world. Moments later, the room's power flickered, then went dark. Emergency lights kicked in, casting the space in red. Julian grabbed the backup phone and pulled up the building's security feed. 4 men. Tactical gear. Coming up the service stairwell. Samantha grabbed the go bag in Mason's arm. "We move. Now." But Mason didn't flinch. He walked ahead faster, firmer than before. Whatever sickness had once bound him was gone. This time, he said, we don't run. We finish this. The elevator was dead. The main stairwell blocked. That left one option, the fire exit leading to the rooftop. Mason didn't hesitate. The old him, the sedated, weakened version, might have been carried. But this Mason moved with purpose, bounding 2 steps at a time as Samantha and Julian followed behind. The rooftop air was sharp and biting. From here, the city looked almost peaceful, glass towers catching the rising sun, traffic just beginning to stir. But they had no time to admire the view. From the other end of the rooftop, 3 men in tactical gear burst through a second access door. Julian pulled Samantha down behind a large HVAC unit. They're not here to warn us. They're here to erase us. Mason remained standing, exposed. Let them see me. One of the men raised a hand but didn't shoot. A pause. Recognition flickered behind his visor. Then he stepped forward and lowered his weapon. He's alive, the man whispered. They said he'd been silenced. Samantha stood slowly. You were lied to. Just like we were. The man looked around, uncertain. His team shifted. A long moment passed. Then he turned to Mason and said, We never saw you. He walked away. Just like that, the rooftop emptied. A silent rebellion. A crack in the armor of the syndicate. Julian exhaled, stunned. We're not just exposing the system. We're splitting it. Mason looked toward the skyline. Some people don't want to be part of a lie. They just need permission to leave it. Samantha smiled. Let's give them that permission. And from that rooftop, as the world turned below, they prepared the next move. Not to run, but to stand and be seen. 3 days after the files went live, Mason sat across from a glass table under soft studio lights. No drama. No weapons. Just a microphone, a camera, and a journalist who looked more nervous than him. You're sure you want this recorded? The man asked. Mason nodded. I've lived in silence long enough. It nearly killed me. The interview wasn't explosive. It was quiet. Controlled. Real. Mason didn't shout. He told the story as it happened. From the diagnosis he didn't understand, to the drugs that made him feel numb, to the moment Samantha walked through his door and refused to look away. They called it palliative care, he said. But it was grief on a schedule. And I wasn't done living. The footage went viral within hours. Not because it was sensational, but because it was honest. At home, Samantha sat on the couch beside Julian, watching the segment. He's doing better than I expected, she said, smiling faintly. Julian chuckled. Honestly? Me too. For someone they tried to bury, he's standing pretty tall. Elaine hadn't been seen since the plaza. Her lawyers issued a statement. Our client was unaware of any unlawful practices and cooperated fully with authorities. But Mason's story made that line hard to believe, especially when whistleblowers began surfacing. Former nurses, admin staff, and even one ex-client's family. A wave was building, and this time no amount of silence could hold it back. The emails started the morning after the interview. Not from journalists or lawyers, but from survivors. People who had once stayed at Harrow. Some anonymous, others brave enough to sign their names. One woman wrote, My sister was sent to Harrow after a breakdown. We never saw her again. Your story gave us hope that she might still be out there. Another said, They told me I was unstable. Turns out, I just didn't fit into my father's company brand. Samantha read every single message, carefully organizing them into folders. This is bigger than even we thought, she said, eyes scanning the latest note from a former doctor who had quit the facility in disgust. This isn't a scandal. It's a movement. Mason sat across from her, quietly holding a letter in his hand. It had come by post. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper. You're the reason I didn't give up, it read. Keep speaking. Some of us are still trapped in places that look like paradise. He didn't show it, but Samantha saw the way his grip tightened. The pain was still there. The trauma didn't vanish with the truth. But the difference now is this: Mason wasn't alone anymore. Julian stepped into the room, coffee in hand. You two have been quiet. Samantha looked up. Mason got a letter. From someone who was almost him. Julian nodded slowly. Then I guess we don't stop. Not until every single one of them knows they weren't crazy. They were controlled. And in that small apartment, surrounded by stories of people they had never met, they began to plan again. But this time not for survival. For justice. It had been 5 months since Mason last stepped inside the Carter estate. The grand marble floors, the gold-accented staircases, the tall glass windows, they all looked exactly the same. But this time he didn't enter as a shadow of himself. He entered as the man they couldn't erase. Elaine wasn't there. She'd left the country 3 weeks earlier, just before the formal investigations began. Her assets were frozen. Her public image was cracked beyond repair. Mason didn't come to reclaim her home. He came for the things she tried to lock away. A legal team escorted him inside. Julian and Samantha walked with him, quiet but present. In the old study, behind a false wall panel, they found it. A storage case containing old journals, photographs, and handwritten letters from their father. Most had been hidden, redacted, or sealed. One letter caught Mason's eye. It was addressed to both sons. If you're reading this, then you already know the truth. I built something that became a monster. And I tried to stop it too late. If you can undo what I allowed, then maybe this name, our name, can mean something again. Mason stood still for a moment, letting the words wash over him. Then he folded the letter and put it into his coat pocket. I'm not rebuilding the Carter name, he said softly. I'm retiring it. Samantha smiled. Then what do we build instead? Julian placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. Something that doesn't start with money. Something that starts with truth. And with that, they left the house for good. No longer prisoners. No longer heirs. Just people choosing not to be silenced. They named it the Blaine Truth Initiative, a foundation not built on wealth, but on purpose. Mason wanted it simple. A platform for survivors of institutional abuse, silenced heirs, and erased voices. The kinds of people Harrow had swallowed and repackaged. With Samantha overseeing outreach and Julian handling operations, they opened a small office downtown. No marble floors, no gold accents. Just desks, stories, and open doors. Samantha handled the first intake call herself. A young man from Canada, who had once been forced into a wellness facility by his mother's PR team. I thought I was crazy, he said. But I wasn't. I just didn't fit their brand. By the end of the call, Samantha was crying. Quietly. The kind of cry that comes from relief and anger all at once. Later that week, they hosted their first in-person forum. Survivors flew in from 4 countries. Mason sat on stage not as a symbol but as a witness. He spoke slowly. I'm not healed completely. Some days I still wake up expecting to feel sick. But I'm not sick. I'm recovering from what they made me believe. The crowd clapped, not wildly but sincerely.
No flashing cameras. No headlines.
Just people listening, nodding, weeping. And in that moment, Mason realized something profound. Truth didn't just destroy systems. It rebuilt people. Outside the event hall, Julian stood by the door, watching every person who entered. It's starting, he said to Samantha. She looked over at Mason, who was now hugging a mother who hadn't seen her son in 5 years. Yes, she whispered. And this time they're watching us. 2 weeks after the forum, Samantha received an unexpected call. The number was international. The voice on the other end spoke with a calm Swiss accent. We've been following the Blaine Initiative. We'd like to formally invite Mr. Blaine to speak before the Human Rights Commission in Geneva. She sat up straighter in her chair. Are you saying? Yes, the voice interrupted gently. We're launching an inquiry into off-grid behavioral facilities globally. His testimony could help shape new protections for vulnerable individuals, especially in elite cases. Mason listened quietly as she explained. He looked both surprised and tired. I never thought I'd be talking to governments about what they did to me. Julian stepped in. That's because most people don't survive it long enough to speak. The invitation wasn't about fame, it was accountability. A chance to make sure what happened to Mason, and to so many others, would never be buried again behind NDAs and mental wellness labels. That night, Mason sat alone on the small balcony of their apartment. The city was quiet. Lights blinked gently from office towers. Samantha joined him, carrying 2 mugs of tea. You ever think we'd make it here? She asked. Mason shook his head slowly. There were days I thought I'd never make it out of that room. The one where they kept the pills. The windows didn't even open. She handed him the tea. Well, the window's open now. They sat in silence after that. But it wasn't the silence they used to fear. It was peace, the kind you fight for and bleed to earn. It had been almost a year since Mason sat at a table with people he trusted. Not an interview. Not a forum. Just a meal. Home-cooked. Shared quietly in Samantha's small apartment. Julian brought groceries. Mason cooked something simple. Baked chicken, sweet potatoes, and grilled vegetables. It wasn't fancy, but it felt real. The TV was off. The laptops were closed. For once no one was talking about Harrow, Elaine, or Justice. Until Julian set his fork down and said, "You ever think about her?" Samantha paused. Mason didn't look up. "Elaine?" he asked. Julian nodded. Not in a forgive her kind of way. Just, wonder if she regrets any of it. Mason leaned back in his chair. "I used to hope she did. Now I'm not sure it matters." Samantha glanced between the brothers. Some people don't regret. They rebrand. I think if she ever resurfaces, it'll be with a new name and another mask. The room grew quiet again. But it wasn't heavy. It was honest. After dinner, Mason found himself alone in the kitchen washing dishes. He paused, hands in the water, staring out the window. He didn't miss the mansion, or the silence that echoed in its walls. But sometimes late at night, he still dreamt he was back in that chair, being spoon-fed pills. He shook the thought away and dried the last plate. This life wasn't glamorous, but it was his. Finally, and for the first time, Mason realized he wasn't just surviving. He was living. Julian burst into the apartment just past 8 p.m., a crumpled newspaper in hand and a fire in his eyes. "You need to see this," he said, tossing it onto the table in front of Mason and Samantha. The article wasn't front page. It was buried deep inside the international section of an Italian paper. But there she was, Elaine Carter, photographed on the steps of a boutique hotel in Florence. Sunglasses, a scarf, and a different haircut, but unmistakable. "She's calling herself Helena White now," Julian said. "Registered the hotel under that name. Private security. Rumors say she's working through a Swiss broker to sell some of her remaining assets." Samantha scanned the article. No charges filed yet. But Interpol's watching. Quietly. Mason stared at the image for a long moment. "She looks older." Julian scoffed. "Guilt'll do that. Or fear." But Mason didn't smile. She always knew how to run. She trained her entire life to control a narrative. Even her disappearance. Later that night, when Mason was alone, he pulled out an old journal from the Carter estate. Tucked inside the back was something he hadn't noticed before. A voice memo card. Labeled in Elaine's handwriting. "For when they find me." He plugged it into his laptop. Her voice played softly, almost broken. "Mason, if you're hearing this, I didn't flee because I won. I fled because I lost control. The truth was never supposed to live outside those walls. You weren't supposed to remember. I'm not sorry for protecting the legacy, but I am sorry you became its casualty." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing Mason would ever get. The next morning, Mason didn't speak much. He took a long walk alone. No guards, no press, no Julian. Just a hoodie, a pair of sunglasses, and his thoughts. Florence was far away. But Elaine's voice, echoing in his ears from the night before, made her feel painfully close. When he returned, Samantha was in the kitchen scrolling through emails. "Interpol confirmed it," she said quietly. "Elaine's using 2 passports. She's been bouncing between Italy and Luxembourg under alias protection." Mason sat down, exhaling slowly. "She'll never come back." Julian appeared in the doorway.
No.
Because prison isn't her fear. Irrelevance is. They all knew it now. Elaine would never face a judge. Never stand trial. But she would live the rest of her life in hiding. Stripped of the power she once used like a weapon. No more foundation galas. No more family name. No more press smiling politely at her lies. Later that evening, Mason went to the old apartment in Lagos that his father once kept. He hadn't been there in years. The walls still smelled like dust and leather-bound books. In the corner of the study sat a worn armchair, untouched since before Julian vanished. On a shelf nearby was a note in his father's handwriting. Just one line. A legacy isn't built by how you protect your name, but by how you choose to speak when silence benefits you most. Mason folded the note and put it into his pocket next to Elaine's audio. One lie, one truth. And in the quiet of that room, he let them both go. That night after dinner, Samantha and Mason found themselves alone on the balcony again. The city was louder now. More people on the streets, music drifting from a rooftop 2 buildings over, someone laughing nearby. But the noise didn't bother them. Felt like proof they were still here, still alive. Samantha stared down at her tea, swirling it slowly. Do you ever think about what you'd be doing right now if all of this hadn't happened? Mason didn't answer immediately. He looked out toward the skyline, lights blinking like quiet confessions in the distance. I'd probably still be in that room, he said finally, thinking I was dying, waiting for someone to tell me when to stop existing. She looked over at him. And now? Mason turned to face her. Now I get to ask myself what I want. Not what I'm allowed to want. Not what's been assigned. He smiled faintly. You taught me that. Samantha blinked, taken aback. I didn't. You didn't have to, Mason interrupted. You just stayed. And that's something no one had ever done for me without a reason. The silence between them this time wasn't heavy. It was warm, full of things unsaid but deeply understood. She reached out and rested her hand on his. Well, I'm still here. Mason nodded, squeezing her fingers gently. I know. There was no kiss. No dramatic music. Just the feeling that 2 people had walked through fire and somehow, against every odd, found stillness beside each other. Julian had always been the quiet one. Even before Harrow. Before the lies. Before he disappeared. Mason had always admired how he could say more with silence than most could with a speech. But on a crisp afternoon, during a small private gathering of survivors and advocates, Julian surprised everyone. He stood up and asked to speak. The room stilled.
No cameras.
No news crew. Just a handful of people who had lived different versions of the same trauma. Julian cleared his throat, holding a faded photograph of himself and Mason as teenagers, both laughing at the edge of a lake. This was before they tried to mold us into statues. Before they cared more about image than honesty. He looked around the room. I disappeared not just because I was afraid, but because I didn't know how to fight a war no one believed was happening. I thought silence would protect me. He glanced at Mason, who nodded quietly from his seat. But silence didn't protect me. It only paused the damage. Kept happening to Mason, to others. And it will keep happening unless people like us keep speaking. The room erupted in quiet applause. Not out of politeness but out of deep respect. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, Mason found Julian sitting alone outside, staring at the photo. You did good today, Mason said. Julian smiled faintly. Took me long enough. They sat there for a while side by side. No more words necessary. Because some silences don't hide pain anymore. Some silences mean peace. It wasn't on anyone's calendar. Not a holiday. Not a grand occasion. But Samantha remembered, it was Mason's birthday. Or at least, the one Elaine told him was his birthday. Over breakfast, she slid a small envelope across the table.
No declaración.
No card. Just a folded receipt and a photo. Mason raised an eyebrow. I found the original birth record, she said. Took a few strings to pull. It was buried in sealed records under Blaine, not Carter. He unfolded the paper and stared at it in silence. You were born 2 weeks earlier than they said, she added softly. Your real birthday's today. Julian, sipping coffee at the kitchen counter, gave a half smile. Well, that explains why Mom never let us celebrate it. Mason looked between them, then down at the birth certificate again. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Mason leaned back, smiled and said, Happy birthday to me. They didn't throw a party.
No balloons. No cake.
Just 3 people sitting around a table, laughing over a slightly burnt breakfast and a real name finally reclaimed. Later that night, Mason tucked the birth record into a folder next to the letter from his father and the audio from Elaine. 3 pieces of a puzzle he never wanted but finally understood. Not to keep, but to let go. He didn't need the name anymore. He had himself. Mason hadn't been back to the clinic since everything came out. Not the fake facility Elaine staged for the press, but the real one. The place where they kept him under sedation, where they called it treatment, and wrote daily reports about his decline. He didn't want to go back, but he needed to. Samantha drove. Julian didn't come this time. Some doors, he said, you walk through alone. The facility was quieter now. Most of the staff had been let go. The name on the front sign had already been stripped. Inside, it felt less like a hospital and more like a waiting room that had outlived its purpose. An administrator, new younger, met them and nodded quietly. We kept the files, she said. They're yours now. In a plain manila folder were his records. Medication logs, behavioral notes, fabricated scans. But tucked inside was something else. Something Mason hadn't expected. A letter. From a nurse. Handwritten. You probably don't remember me. I cared for you in room 12. I knew what they were doing wasn't right. I just didn't know how to stop it. I'm sorry. You deserved better. Mason folded the letter and held it tightly in his fist. I don't remember her, he said softly. But I believe her. They didn't stay long. Just enough to gather what needed to be claimed, and leave behind what no longer deserved to exist. On the way back, Samantha reached across the car and touched his hand. How do you feel? She asked. Mason stared out the window for a long moment before answering. Free, he said. And not in the way they said I should be, but the kind that feels like I earned it. That evening after they got home, Mason opened a box he hadn't touched in months. It was the only item he'd taken from Elaine's personal closet before they left the Carter estate. Samantha had never asked about it. She assumed it was private, maybe even painful. But now Mason wanted to see what she had hidden, what she kept even from herself. Inside were items that seemed random. A faded childhood drawing signed M+J, an old boarding school yearbook with Julian's photo circled, and one lone cassette tape labeled simply, Marcus. Their father. Samantha knelt beside him as he placed the tape into a small player. The voice that came through wasn't commanding or cruel. It was soft, tired. Elaine, if you ever hear this, it means the boys found the truth. Good. Let them. We built too much on fear. And I watched you teach them how to vanish instead of how to fight. You loved control. I loved peace. Maybe that's why we lost both. The recording ended there. No grand confession, no final plot twist. Just a man admitting in his final hours that control had cost them everything. Mason didn't say a word. Samantha didn't push. He put the tape back in the box, folded the drawing gently, and closed the lid. Later that night, he slid the box under the bed, not to forget but to rest. Because some truths don't demand to be carried every day. Some truths once faced are allowed to sleep. The next morning Mason left early, no phone, no plan. Just a hoodie, headphones, and an old pair of sneakers that still bore traces of dust from their escape months ago. He didn't tell Julian. He didn't wake Samantha. He just needed to move. Not to run, but to remember that he could. He walked through the city like a ghost rejoining the living. Vendors shouted. Buses hissed by. The air smelled like roasted corn and wet pavement. For the first time in years, no one stared at him. No one whispered his name like a headline. He was just a man walking. He passed by a school playground and paused. A group of kids were laughing, chasing each other. One of them tripped and fell. His friend helped him up, no teasing, no waiting. Just a hand and a smile. Mason found himself smiling too. Later, he stopped at a roadside cafe and bought a bottle of water. The vendor didn't flinch when he handed over his card. He didn't say, "Aren't you that guy from the news?" Just nodded and said, "Take care of yourself, brother." That was it. That was the dream. By the time Mason returned to the apartment, the sun was sliding down the sky. Julian was on a call. Samantha was on the couch reading. She looked up when he came in but didn't ask anything. He walked to the balcony and stood there for a moment, watching the streetlights blink on. He didn't need a reason to breathe anymore. He just did. Mason stood in front of the mirror in the hallway. Not the kind you pass by without thinking, but the one you face when you need to know what you look like when no one else is watching. He'd avoided mirrors for years. Not because of shame but because of disconnection. Back then the face staring back felt like someone else. Someone sedated, managed, monitored. Now it was just him.
No branded blazer.
No staged expression. Just a plain t-shirt and clean skin. The dark circles under his eyes had faded. The posture was stronger. He leaned forward slightly, staring into his own eyes. "I remember you," he whispered. Behind him, Samantha's reflection appeared. She leaned against the doorway, saying nothing at first. Then gently, "You look like someone who made it through." Mason turned halfway. "I feel like someone who's still learning how to stay." They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. The old relationship, the one forged through chaos and survival, had become something else. Softer. Safer. Not built on rescue but respect. Samantha stepped forward, resting her hand on the frame of the mirror beside his. "You don't owe the world anything else, Mason. Just your peace." He nodded slowly. "I think I finally believe that." They stayed there for a few more seconds, two reflections sharing a quiet truth. Not everyone gets to meet themselves again. But Mason did. That evening, Julian handed Mason a single sheet of folded paper. "I wrote this while I was off-grid," he said, not meeting Mason's eyes. "Back when I didn't think I'd ever come back. I wasn't sure you'd survive, or forgive me." Mason hesitated before taking it. "Why didn't you send it?" Julian shrugged. "I didn't think I had the right." Mason unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was rough, uneven, like it had been written through trembling hands. "Mason, if you're reading this, I probably didn't make it. I know they've told you I'm dead, or gone mad or abandoned you, maybe all three. But the truth is, I never stopped thinking about you. Every city I hid in, I saw you in the crowd. Every night, I wondered if they were feeding you the same fear they gave me. I'm sorry I wasn't there to stop them. But I'm here now. And if I ever make it back, I'll stand beside you, not in front, not behind. Just next to you, where brothers belong." Mason's hands trembled slightly as he folded the letter again. "I didn't need it then," he said softly. "But I think I needed it now." Julian finally looked up. "So we're good." Mason nodded, voice thick. "We're better than good. We're here." Samantha watched from across the room, her heart full. For the first time since this all began, the distance between the brothers wasn't just closed, it was healed. Some relationships don't survive fire. This one did. One afternoon, while clearing out old digital files from Harrow's archive, Samantha came across a flagged folder labeled, Liana A. Discontinued case. She almost skipped it. So many names had passed through her hands. But something about this one made her pause. When she opened it, her breath caught. Liana wasn't a patient. She was a whistleblower. A nurse. 23. Employed for just 11 months. She had submitted 3 internal complaints about drug overuse, medical record forgery, and patients being removed from therapy without cause. Her final entry simply read, "If something happens to me, tell Mason he was never the problem. The system was." Samantha sat frozen for a moment. Then she called Mason into the room. He read the file quietly. His expression didn't twist in rage or sadness. It just softened. "I don't remember her," he said finally. "But maybe she was the reason I made it through those last few months. Maybe she slowed them down." Samantha nodded. "I think she was your first defender. Before me. Before Julian. And they erased her. They printed her complaint and framed it in a small shadow box. No press release. No announcement. Just a quiet corner of the Blaine apartment, next to the bookshelves, where her words could live in peace." Mason touched the frame before walking away. "Her name was Liana," he said. "She mattered." The coffee shop wasn't anything special. Tucked into the corner of a quiet street, its windows fogged in the mornings, its wooden tables always slightly sticky. But it was real. And that's what Mason liked about it.
No cameras. No curated playlists.
Just mismatched mugs and regular people. It became his routine Friday mornings, 1 hour alone, a notebook in hand. Not to write a book or a statement. Just thoughts. Things he didn't want to forget. Not the trauma but the small victories that followed. Today he wrote, I laughed out loud yesterday. Like really laughed.
No cámara.
No reason. It just happened. Across the cafe, a young couple argued over whether almond or oat milk was superior. An older man snored gently in the corner. Life moved around him, imperfect and wonderful. Samantha joined him halfway through his cup. No invitation needed. She just slid into the seat opposite and handed him a small paper bag. What's this? He asked, sipping his drink. Banana bread. Your new favorite, remember? He smiled. I didn't know I had favorites. You do now. They sat there for a while, people watching, occasionally talking, mostly just being. Mason had once thought survival meant escaping, but now he understood, sometimes survival is about staying, choosing to sit still, choosing to belong. He glanced around the cafe. No one whispered. No one pointed. No one knew he was anyone other than a man with a notebook and banana bread. And for Mason, that was everything. It aired unexpectedly. A grainy pre-recorded video uploaded to a mid-tier European media outlet. No makeup, no lighting. Just Elaine Carter, now going by Helena White, sitting in a bare room, her once perfect hair tucked into a simple scarf. Samantha found it first. She paused the video halfway through, turned to Mason and said, You should see this. Not because she deserves your attention, but because it's finally over. Mason sat beside her on the couch. No volume. Just subtitles. Elaine stared into the camera, looking far older than her 61 years. The voice in the captions was calm, but hollow. I don't ask for forgiveness. I know I won't get it. I ask only that the people I hurt use what they've gained to build something better. I tried to protect a name. I failed to protect the people behind it. She paused. Mason, you remember too much now. And maybe that's what will save you. Julian entered the room midway, stopped cold. Is that? Mason nodded. It's not her power anymore. It's her echo. The video lasted just under 7 minutes. It wasn't picked up by any major outlet.
No trending hashtags. No redemption arc.
Just a woman left behind by the very system she once curated. Afterward, Mason stood by the window, watching clouds move slowly across the city skyline. I thought I'd feel more something. Samantha joined him. Revenge doesn't heal. But knowing you outlived the lie? That's everything. He nodded. Elaine Carter was gone. Not by death, but by erasure. And this time truth had done the erasing. The story had gone quiet. Not because people forgot, but because the truth had finally landed. Elaine Carter was no longer a name on social rosters, or whispered in boardrooms. HERA was dissolved. Laws were passed. Protections were drafted. But that wasn't what mattered most to Mason. What mattered was today. A small, private lunch with Julian and Samantha. No headlines. No causes. Just 3 people who had once been strangers to their own names, now building something real. Julian brought an old photo album. Not from the Carter house, but from their father's flat in Lagos. Inside were candid photos neither Mason nor Julian had seen. Them as kids, playing in the sand. Their father holding them both, laughing. I don't remember this, Mason said, his voice soft. Julian nodded. Me neither. But maybe this is who we were before they started rewriting us. Samantha reached across the table and placed a plain black notebook in front of Mason. I've seen you writing in scraps, napkins, the backs of receipts. So here. Inside the cover she'd written one sentence. Your story in your own words on your own time. Mason closed the book gently. For the first time in my life, he said, I feel like I don't have to defend who I am. I can just be it. Julian raised his glass. Then let's stop surviving and start living. They toasted with water and orange juice. No wine.
No flash.
Just peace. Outside life went on. And inside, a legacy wasn't repaired or revived. It was rebuilt, from nothing but truth and time. Mason never imagined his life would feel small, in the best way.
No spotlights. No statements.
Just early mornings in a city that didn't ask questions. Coffee. Conversations. A laugh that came from somewhere real. Some days he woke up and forgot to think about survival. He thought about what to cook, what to write, where to go walking. Freedom, it turned out, wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Julian had started teaching part-time. Philosophy of all things. He liked the structure, the questions, the way students leaned in when he spoke about identity. Not from textbooks, but from experience. Samantha began freelancing again. Her stories weren't about billionaires or betrayal anymore. They were about people. Real ones. Survivors. Truth-tellers. Builders. As for Mason, he finished the notebook. Slowly. Carefully. He didn't try to make it perfect. He just made it true. The last page had one sentence. I wasn't supposed to survive, but I did. And I didn't just come back, I arrived. One afternoon, he left the notebook at a quiet local library with no fanfare. Tucked between biographies and memoirs. No author name. No title. Just a note on the first page. If you're holding this, it means you've made it far enough to question the version of you they sold. Keep going. That night, he sat on the rooftop with Julian and Samantha as city lights blinked around them. There was no plan for tomorrow. No fear of it either. Just the sound of a life reclaimed, one breath at a time. Because in the end, the story didn't need to go viral. Just needed to be real. And it was. He wasn't supposed to survive. But he did. And in doing so, he showed us that truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just refuses to stay buried. Thank you for watching the final chapter. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in truth, healing, and starting over. New stories every week. Subscribe for more. The next one might change you too.